Welcome back to beginning composition. Our conversation begins again on capital letters on page 477. So, a gentle reminder of capital letters. So when is it appropriate to capitalize? Again, first word in a sentence, and the first word in a direct quote. Name of a person, and the word I. So name of particular places, such as Atlanta, Georgia, or particular places like Chichen Itza, or specific places like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, particular places like the Eiffel Tower. All these words need to be capitalized. So again, names of the days of the week, months, and holidays. Names of commercial products like soft soap, Dial, Mr. Clean. All of these names need to be capitalized. Names of organizations, so groups, associations, companies, unions, and clubs. Titles of books, magazines, newspapers, articles, stories, poems, films, TV shows, songs, papers, and anything of the likewise. Names that show family relationships, so mother, father, brother, sister. School courses, just like beginning composition. Languages, such as French, Spanish, English, Latin. Geographic locations, such as northwest, south, southwest, east. Historical periods and events, the Civil War, Independence Day, anything that has to do with historical periods, so the 1920s. Races, nations, and nationalities. And finally, the opening and closing of a letter all need to have capital letters. So, a reminder for numbers. Reminder, spell out numbers you can write in 2 words or less. So apostrophes, once again, continuing on with our conversation about apostrophes. This comes from page 460 in your textbook. 2 main uses of the apostrophe are 1. To show the omission of one or more letters in a contraction, or 2. To show ownership or possession. Remember, a contraction is formed when 2 words are combined to make 1 word. So I plus am equals I'm. They plus are equals their. Who plus is equals whose. It has equals its. It plus is equals its. So it plus has and it plus is are the same because of the verb. And one interesting and unusual contraction, will plus not actually equals won't. So our conversation on quotation marks begins on page 469 in your textbook. Use quotation marks to show the exact words of a writer or speaker. A comma/period goes before the quotation mark. So, if you are breaking up a quotation, after the first quotation, you would, of course, use a comma and continue on with the quotation mark and then the sentence. If the quotation ends the sentence, you will have a period and then the quotation mark. So the period or the punctuation always goes before the second quotation mark. Here are a few quotation mark examples. So our quotation mark, say something tender to me, comma, question mark, or whispered Lola to Tony. So our quotation marks go around, say something tender to me. These are the quotation marks set off the exact words Lola spoke to Tony. As you can see here, the comma goes before the second quotation mark. Mark Twain once wrote, comma, space, quotation mark, the more I know about human beings, comma, the more I like my dog, period, quotation mark. Quotation marks set off the exact words that Mark Twain wrote. So, as you can see here, Mark Twain, we have our noun, once wrote being our verb, comma, and then our quotation mark, followed by our quote, period, quotation mark. The thing that you should also realize is that when you are including quotation marks, they need to have both a subject and verb to introduce or conclude the idea. You should not have a quotation mark as a full, complete sentence by itself. A quotation mark means that these are someone's exact words, and the subject and verb that you use before or after help explain what the entire quotation is about and the relevancy. If you are putting quotation marks around something and leaving it as its own incomplete sentence, this is incorrect. It means that it could be crossed out of the paragraph or paper, and it is not essential to what is being said. So you want to make sure that you include both a subject and verb to include them into the paragraph paper, and also that there is relevancy and introduction to why this quote might be important. Again, the last one, it says quotation mark, the only dumb question, comma, quotation mark, the instructor said, comma, quotation mark, is the one you don't ask, period, quotation mark. So these are two pairs of quotation marks are used to enclose the instructor's exact words. So where it says the only dumb question, that quotation is continued after the instructor said. As you can see, after the only dumb question, there is a comma because, of course, if the period were placed, not only would you have a fragment to lead into the sentence, but also it does not show, if the period were there, that the first quotation mark relates to the second quotation. So our quotation mark activity. Every quotation begins with a blank letter. When a quotation is split, the second part does not begin with a capital letter unless it is a blank sentence. Blank are used to separate the quoted part of a sentence from the rest of the sentence, and commas and periods that come at the end of a quotation should go blank the quotation marks. So as you can see how we answer our quotation mark activity for the beginning of our chapter. Every quotation begins with a capital letter. When a quotation is split, the second part does not begin with a capital letter unless it is a new sentence. Commas are used to separate the quoted part of a sentence from the rest of the sentence. And 4, commas and periods that come at the end of a quotation should go inside the quotation marks. So quotation marks. When something is said indirectly, then you do not have to use quotation marks. So here's our idea. Mark Twain once stated that the more he hears about human beings, the more he likes dogs. Because of the word that, we're not saying that these are direct words of Mark Twain. So again, when something is said indirectly, then you don't have to use quotation marks. When talking about short stories, you need to start off works of short stories by quotation marks. So like in The Hunger Games, the chapter scene would be in quotation marks. Also, within textbooks, plays, poems, you may have short stories that are set off by quotation marks. Usually with the idea of quotation marks, you're looking at something 60 pages or less. So quotation mark review. Please complete review test number 1 on Blackboard. Also, as a review, take a look at page 475, review test 2. The page 475, review test 2 does not need to be turned in, but it is something that will help you review and prepare for our future study. Another assignment I have for you, and this of course will stay in your PowerPoint up on Blackboard. Using this comic strip, write a full description that will enable people who do not read the comic strip to visualize it clearly and appreciate its humor. Describe the setting and action in each panel and enclose the words of the speakers in quotation marks. When you are finished with this full description, please email this to me. So again, because I will be switching in a second, this Baby Blues assignment can be found in the PowerPoint that is located under Assignments in your Week 5 folder. Moving on to commas, Chapter 34, page 476. There are 6 main uses of the comma. Number 1, to separate items in a series. Number 2, to set off introductory material. Number 3, before and after words that interrupt the flow of thought in a sentence. Number 4, before two complete thoughts connected by for and nor, but or, yet so. Number 5, to set off a direct quotation from the rest of a sentence. And number 6, for certain everyday material.
So commas. Let's look over another place for commas. One place to look for other comma examples is to Google commas. So let's visit the Purdue OWL website. So, extended rules for using commas. This comma website on the Purdue OWL Online Writing Lab is a great place to visit when you're looking for more information on commas. As you can see for comma use, it gives you a few examples. The one I really want you to look at here, of course, is the independent clause, followed by a comma, and but, and then another independent clause. This is the example of using for and nor, but or, yet so one of our fanboys, one of our coordinating conjunctions, in the midst of two independent clauses. The next place is one of the places that people use commas and create comma splices the most if they don't know how to use this correctly. So number 2, where it says, use commas after introductory clauses, phrases, or words that come before the main clause. So this does not have to be a dependent clause. It may be something that is a prepositional phrase. So examples, while I was eating, comma. While I was eating, as we can see, we have both a subject and a verb phrase, but the word while creates our subordinate conjunction. And of course, it shows us that we have an introductory clause, and we use a comma after eating. So while I was eating, comma, the cat scratched at the door. One realization that you may have is, if you are to say the sentence out loud, you may actually create the pause in your own spoken language. So while I was eating, the cat scratched at the door. Usually you would create a pause here. The second example, because her alarm clock was broken, comma, she was late for class. The third example, if you are ill, comma, you ought to see a doctor. If you are ill starts off a dependent clause followed by a comma and then leads into our independent clause. So here's the idea. However, don't put a comma after the main clause when a dependent clause follows it. So this creates our sentence formula ID. So we have an independent clause followed by a dependent clause. That independent clause, the cat scratched at the door. The dependent clause is while I was eating. While does not need a comma before it, so you can omit this comma here in the first incorrect sentence. So the cat scratched at the door while I was eating is a full complete sentence. If you throw the comma in there, it creates a comma splice. So a correct way to do this, she was still quite upset, comma, although she had won the Oscar. So this is something that shows extreme contrast. Most of the time you want to be aware of how your comma should be used.
Alright, as we continue on down, it says common introductory phrases that should be followed by a comma include participial and infinitive phrases, absolute phrases, non-essential appositive phrases, and long prepositional phrases over 4 words. So with these common introductory phrases, what you will see is that this information is not essential to the rest of the sentence. What it does is tell us more information about what's coming next in the sentence. So having finished the test, comma, he left the room. Of course, if I say he left the room, I have a full complete sentence, but what this is telling me more about is that, well, because I finished the test, or he finished the test, he got up and left the room. So it's explanation. And then again, to get a seat, you'd better come early. You'd better come early is good information, but to get a seat adds even more. So if you don't want to stay in the entire class, you better come early. And after the test, but before lunch, comma, I went jogging. So I finished the test, I went jogging, and then I had lunch. So of course, I went jogging, full complete sentence, but that introductory phrase gives us more information, more detail. And the sun radiating intense heat, comma, we sought shelter in the cafe. So the sun radiating intense heat obviously is a cause, and the effect is that we sought shelter in the cafe. And of course, number 3, it says use a pair of commas in the middle of a sentence to set off clauses, phrases, and words that are not essential to the meaning of the sentence. Use one comma before to indicate the beginning of the pause, and one at the end to indicate the end of the pause. So here are some clues to help you decide whether the sentence element is essential. If you leave out the clause, phrase, or word, does the sentence still make sense? The answer should be yes. Does the clause, phrase, or word interrupt the flow of words in the original sentence? And of course, for this sentence, does the clause, phrase, or word interrupt the flow of words in the original sentence? It should be no. And if you move the element to a different position in the sentence, does the sentence still make sense? Yes. So if you answer yes to one or more of these questions, then the element in this question is non-essential and should be set off with commas. So here are some example sentences with non-essential elements. So the clause, that Tuesday, comma, which happens to be my birthday, comma, again, this is added information. If I eliminate it, the sentence says, that Tuesday is the only day when I am available to meet. Here's another phrase. This restaurant has an exciting atmosphere. The food, comma, on the other hand, comma, is rather bland. So you said one positive thing, but now on the opposite, you say the food is rather bland. And here's one word. I appreciate your hard work, period. In this case, comma, however, comma, you seem to have overexerted yourself. This word is added in as a but or for instance, and it adds to the overall meaning of the sentence. But as you can see, these are not essential to the rest of the sentence, but of course, they add information. At number 4, it says, do not use commas to set off essential elements of the sentence, such as clauses beginning with that. That clauses after nouns are always essential. That clauses following a verb expressing mental action are always essential. So the book that I borrowed from you is excellent. We cannot set that off by commas. And of course, she believes that she will be able to earn an A. And students who cheat only harm themselves. Of course, other places to use commas to separate 3 or more words, phrases, or clauses written in a series. So these would be compound subjects or compound verbs. And number 6, use commas to separate 2 or more coordinate adjectives that describe the same noun. Be sure never to add an extra comma between the final adjective and the noun itself, or to use commas with non-coordinate adjectives. So, as you can see here, he was a difficult, comma, stubborn child. Here the comma is needed. The next sentence, they lived in a white frame house. This is non-coordinate, so you would not want to include the comma here. She often wore a gray wool shawl, so this is non-coordinate. And your cousin has an easy, comma, happy smile, and this is where we would use a comma. So, number 7, use a comma near the end of a sentence to separate contrasted coordinate elements or to indicate a distinct pause or shift. He was merely ignorant, comma, not stupid. The chimpanzee seemed reflective, comma, almost human. You're one of the senator's close friends, comma, aren't you? And the speaker seemed innocent, comma, even gullible. So all of these separate contrasted coordinate elements, or they indicate a distinct pause or shift in the sentence, or what someone is saying. And number 8, it says use commas to set off phrases at the end of the sentence that refer to the beginning or middle of the sentence. So such phrases are free modifiers that can be placed anywhere in the sentence without causing confusion. So Nancy waved enthusiastically at the docking ship, laughing joyously. So joyously, followed by a period. So the laughing joyously is correct. But of course, the incorrect way, Lisa waved at Nancy, comma, laughing joyously. Period. So who's laughing at this point? Is it Lisa or Nancy? And we're going to talk about those more when we get to our misplacement of modifiers. And getting to the last part, number 9, use commas to set off all geographical names, items and dates, addresses, and titles. So Birmingham, comma, Alabama, comma, gets its name from Birmingham, comma, England. So we need to use commas in between Birmingham, comma, and Alabama. And as well as with dates, July 22nd, comma, 1959, comma, you want to make sure that all of those commas fall in there. And things like adding on MD, Rachel B. Lake, comma, MD, comma, will be the principal speaker. All of these things need to use commas. Number 10, it says use a comma to shift between the main discourse and quotations. John said without emotion, comma, I'll see you tomorrow. So as you see with the quotation marks, just like we've talked about, you want to use a quotation mark after the comma. So it's comma, quotation mark. At number 11, use commas wherever necessary to prevent possible confusion or misreading. So to George, comma, Harrison had been a sort of idol. So, of course, if that comma wasn't there, it would say to George Harrison had been a sort of idol. And of course, hopefully you know who George Harrison is, and you understand that he was a famous musician, and by creating George Harrison, you've said a person's name and not talking about two separate people. And finally, comma abuse. Number 12. Actually, the information right before that. Commas in the wrong places can break a sentence into illogical segments or confuse readers with unnecessary and unexpected pauses. So for that, number 12, don't use a comma to separate the subject from the verb. If you create a comma in between a subject and verb, most likely you've put them into the wrong phrases, and you might have one being a dependent clause versus actually needing it to be part of the independent clause. Number 13, it says, don't put a comma between the two verbs or verb phrases in a compound predicate. So, we laid out our music and snacks and began to study. By breaking that up, it says that and study is not as important. You want to make sure that you don't throw the extra comma in there. And the second one there, it says incorrect. I turned the corner, comma, and ran smack into a patrol car. By putting in that comma there, that and ran smack into a patrol car is now creating a fragment part of that sentence. Because as you will see, we are missing a noun. So by adding in that extra comma, we have created a dependent part of our sentence, when in truth it needs to be independent. And number 14, don't put a comma between the two nouns, noun phrases, or noun clauses in a compound subject or a compound object. So the music teacher from your high school and the football coach from mine are married. By putting in that comma, it disjoints the idea. And number 15, don't put a comma after the main clause when a dependent subordinate clause follows it, except for cases of extreme contrast. So the cat scratched at the door, comma, while I was eating. that comma has created a wrong sentence, and a dependent clause is created for while I was eating. And the correct one, it says, she was still quite upset, comma, although she had won the Oscar. This is an example of extreme contrast. If you'd like to find out more information, visit our assignment sheets and you will be able to find the comma use on the Purdue OWL website link. So back to our PowerPoint presentation. Let's put our knowledge to work. Activity 2 on page 478. So place the commas after the introductory material. After the Civil War, comma, my ancestor opened a grocery store in Indianapolis. Number 2. Feeling brave and silly at the same time, comma, Tony volunteered to go on stage and help the magician. Number 3. While I was eating my tuna sandwich, the cat circled my chair like hungry sharks. Number 4. Because Antonelli children grew up near the sea, comma, they learned how to swim when they were very young. Even though the water is still very cold in early March, comma, the family celebrates the first day of spring with a quick dip. And number 5. At first, comma, putting extra hot pepper flakes on the pizza seemed like a good idea, period. However, comma, I felt otherwise when flames seemed to be shooting out of my mouth. So as you can see with these sentences, with number 1 it says after the Civil War, comma, there is a break after the Civil War's introductory material. My ancestor opened a grocery store in Indianapolis is the important part of the sentence. Number 2, feeling brave and silly at the same time, followed by a comma, again is your introductory material. While I was eating my tuna sandwich, comma, as you can see this one starts off with while, and it gives us kind of the clue that we have introductory material before the independent clause. And number 4, because Antonelli children grew up near the sea, comma, again that's introductory material, and we can see because it started off with because. And then the next one, even though the water is still very cold in early March, the even though is also giving us another indicator that this is the start of an independent or a dependent information, and of course it needs to be added onto the independent clause. And number 5, at first, is our introductory phrase, followed by a comma. And then in the second sentence, the word however also gives us an indication that it is part of the introductory phrase. So other punctuation marks. These are on page 553 in your textbook. So any idea what are these markings? Or what are they used for? Any ideas yet? Hopefully you see that there is a semicolon, a dash, a hyphen, parentheses, and a colon marking. So a colon. Use a colon at the end of a complete statement to introduce a list, a long quotation, or an explanation. If you'd like to take the time right now, please create a sentence where you would use a colon marking correctly. Semicolon. Semicolons mark a break between two complete thoughts. When it breaks up two complete thoughts, it tells that these two thoughts can't be broken up. When I talk about punctuation, I like to call the semicolon the Romeo and Juliet of punctuation, because it means everything that goes before the first, or everything that is the first independent clause has to relate to everything in the second independent clause. They just can't be torn apart. And that tells your proofreader, editor, someone working with you, that what happens in the first independent clause needs to go with the second independent clause in your mind. And that semicolon says, please don't move these, please don't break these apart. Also a dash. That is the extra long marking. A dash signals a pause longer than a comma, but not as complete as a period. So use a dash to set off words for a dramatic effect. So longer than a comma, but not as complete as a period. So it's used as a dramatic effect. And a hyphen. Use a hyphen with two or more words that act as a single unit describing a noun. So use a hyphen also to divide a word at the end of a line of writing when you need to hyphenate. And parentheses. Parentheses are used to set off extra or incidental information for the rest of the sentence. It kind of tells you, psst, I have something else I want to tell you. And parentheses then add in extra or incidental information. So, review test on page 488. Let's go over the review together. So, I'm sorry if I do not get these names correct, but number 1, Gdańsk is a major Polish port. It is located on a branch of the Vistula River. So for number 1, as you can see with how this is spaced, Gdańsk is a major Polish port. In my natural language, I pause here. For number 1, I would include a semicolon right after port and before the word it. Number 2, the Vistula River with a length of 651 miles is the largest river in Poland. So the Vistula River with a length of 651 miles is the largest river in Poland. What I would do here is put a comma after river and a comma after miles. Number 3, Gdańsk is a part of a 3-city urban area with a population of over 450,000. So for number 3 on page 488, Gdańsk is a part of a 3-city urban area with a population of over 450,000. For this sentence, do you have any ideas what we would do here? In between 3 and city, as you can see, I've actually already included the hyphen, but I would hyphenate 3 and city. And I like to backtrack back to number 2, where I said you could include commas. What I would also use, because we're talking about different punctuation marks, is I would create the dramatic effect with a dash. So I'd say the Vistula River, dash, with a length of 651 miles, dash, is the largest river in Poland. So not only could I use commas in number 2, I could also use the dash to create more of a dramatic effect, because how many rivers are really 651 miles? I'm not a history teacher, but I don't think it's too many. 651 miles would be pretty long for a river. And moving down to number 4. So for number 4, it says there's a typo here again. The city has 2 ports, Nowy Port, quotation marks, New Port, quotation mark, and Port Polonacki, quotation mark, North Port, quotation mark. So what needs to be here is there needs to be parentheses around the quotation marks New Port, and there needs to be parentheses around North Port. So it goes parenthesis, quotation mark, North Port, quotation mark, parenthesis, and followed by a period. And number 5, what I would use here is actually a colon marking. Arthur Schopenhauer, a Gdańsk native and famous philosopher, wrote, "In Wisdom of Life and Counsels and Maxims." After maxims is where I would put my colon marking. It is a wise thing to be polite, consequently it is a stupid thing to be rude. And then I use the ellipses here at the end to continue the sentence on. So the last one, I would use the colon marking right after maxims. So instead of comma, I use the colon marking to lead into the quotation this author has said. Spelling is also a big part of writing. Words like shopper. To create shopper, it's shop plus ER, but I have to add an extra P. So shop, add an extra P, ER, equals shopper. Equip plus ed equals equipped. Now in this sense, with shopper and equipped, I use a double P on shopper. When it comes to equipped, if I look into my textbook on our spelling section, our spelling section comes in chapter 37. And what you will see is that shopper, so shopper is S-H-O-P-P-E-R, and then the word equipped, E-Q-U-I-P-P-E-D. So we have the double P's in both instances. And then swimming, swim plus ing, we create a double M for swimming. The words like careful, care plus full equals careful, so that's C-A-R-E-F-U-L. Here's a different instance when it comes to spelling. Mary plus E-S, so Mary's. The example would be Mary, drop the Y, add an I, and add E-S. So Mary's is M-A-R-R-I-E-S. The same thing then happens with terrified. Drop the Y and add an I. So T-E-R-R-I-F-I-E-D equals terrified. And the same thing with dries. Dry plus E-S. Change the Y to I. So D-R-I-E-S. And then of course, all of these would come together. So as we think about it, basic spelling rules. What spelling rules can you easily list off? How about things like I before E except after C? Or drop the Y, add an I. Anything with double letters? How about if the ending you are adding starts with a vowel, you want to make sure that you have a double consonant before it. Is there anything else you might be able to think of? How about the silent E at the end? If there's a silent E at the end of the word, you want to make sure that you drop a final E before an ending that starts with a vowel. And new vocabulary on page 509. What I would like you to do on page 509 is complete the vocabulary worksheet on the following 5 words. When you are done with this vocabulary worksheet, please email it to me. This is the one emailing that I'm really looking for you to do, besides the baby blue detail assignment. And finally, commonly confused words. The commonly confused words on the following pages have the same sounds but different meanings and spellings. These words are known as homonyms. So, what I would like you to do is to review the examples starting on page 511. When you are complete with those examples, starting on page 511, take into further consideration which words are homonyms and how can they better help my spelling. At this point, you are complete with Week 5's PowerPoint presentation.